Hey, Cam, how are you, man?
Getting there, Joel. I'm halfway through a huge bowl of coffee and completely forgot that we were doing this morning, so I'm glad you reminded me.
No, that's good. Well, look, we'll jump right into it then, and then that way I won't take too much of your morning up. All right. You got any questions for me, or are you just ready to go?
Yeah, well, my only question is, what are we talking about again? Because I can't remember, but it doesn't matter.
Welcome to Always Listening. I am your host, Joel Sharpton, and I am always listening. I am joined on this episode by Cameron Reilly. If you don't know the name, then you don't know anything about Australian podcasting. Cameron is the host of a myriad of shows, among them, and the reason why you might know him if you're a fan of my podcast, is The Life of Caesar, which originally was about Julius Caesar, has morphed into Augustus, and now you've even revived it to continue the story recently, right, Cam? You've got a new episode coming.
It sounds like it was dead, and
well,
we had to put paddles on it and start giving it mouth to mouth. I'm not sure that's the visual that I want to communicate, Joel.
Fair enough. But you have re-envivened it. How about that? Is that a word we could use?
Well, it's just re-envivened. Yeah, we just kept going. How about that? We just Augustus died. We decided we'd do another one, another emperor.
But not just emperors. You've got a podcast about Napoleon Bonaparte, the life of Alexander the Great. The one that I've just started enjoying personally is The Bullshit Filter, which is about modern politics and some of the current issues that our country or both of our countries actually face. But in particular, you guys seem to be focusing on American politics. Why? Is it just because it's more interesting currently?
Yeah, partly, but also because, we live in the age of the American empire. What happens in America affects the world. So it is the story. Like I always say, if I was doing a podcast in 50 CE, I'd probably be talking about the Roman Empire. When America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. So it is the big story for everybody on the planet, what's going on in the US, because you're the largest military and economic superpower on the planet. America's fingers are literally in everybody's business, and we have to pay attention to what's going on.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning, Cam. You have on your website, one of my favorite things about you, truthfully, is the fact that you don't mind owning your own accomplishments. It's not I think it might come off in a braggadocious way to some people, but it's not. It's just, the places where you are good, the places where you stood out first, and in particular, you have been upfront about reminding people that you were the first podcast in Australia. So how did it start, man? Like, how do you get on this train from the very beginning, from before the beginning, really?
Well, let me expand and contract that a little bit. I was the first Australian podcaster. I started the world's first podcast network. I was the first person to do a Skype interview and put it out as a podcast like this. I think I also pretty much am the godfather of history podcasting. There was one or two history shows available. I think Bob Packett had his history show, but no one had done a long-form history show until I started the Napoleon show. So, yeah, there's a lot of firsts, but the flip side to that is I know nobody gives a shit, and it doesn't matter. Like, I'm not saying this because it's a big deal. It's just history, right? It's the facts. We were there early on. My potted background with that is I had been at Microsoft, working for Microsoft in Australia for close to 10 years, left that, got sort of bored of the corporate world and decided I was going to take a year off and think about what I wanted to do with the next 10 years of my life. This was I left at the end of June 2004. Coincidentally, in July 2004, I think, Adam Curry invented podcasting. He put out the first podcast. I was traveling around Europe at the time, but I got back, heard about podcasting, had just bought my first iPod, which was a big deal for a Microsoft employee buying an Apple product, and started listening to some of the very early podcasts, particularly because most of them were tech related. And I remember listening to the Engadget podcast. Engadget was a blog, it might still be, I'm not sure, but it was one of Jason Calacanis's Weblogs Inc. blogs. It was a tech blog. And Phil Terrone had this podcast on there talking about technology. And I remember getting really excited about it because for the first time I was on a radio-like format, I was hearing tech industry people talking about the tech industry the way that I talked about the tech industry with my friends, but as opposed to radio or TV in this country, whenever they talked about technology, it was always, well, do you see what the kids are doing with the iPod and the internet thing and the data? It was always dumbed down and stupid as shit. So I got really excited and thought, well, maybe I should just start recording my conversations with my friends and put that out there for other people to listen to. Maybe they'll get as excited about listening to that as I am listening to Phil Terrone. And I went looking to see if there were any Australian podcasts to listen to. There weren't. So I started one. I jumped on my blog and said, hey, I'm going to do a podcast. Does anyone want to do one with me? There was a guy that I vaguely knew who lived in a different part of Australia, but he said, sure, I'll do it. Then we had to figure out how to make that work, and recording Skype calls was way complicated back then and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think November 2004, I started G'day World, which was initially sort of a technology-focused show.
And it seems to me if there's like a theme, if there's one like central idea that connects all of your different shows, Cameron, and maybe like even your public persona, it's cutting through that layer of BS, that layer of like nonsense that you put on top. So whether you're talking about Napoleon, whether you're talking about modern politics, or whether you're talking about the ancient Roman Empire or technology, you're just having a conversation like you do have with your friends. And that's what your shows seem to be. That's the message that you continue to put out. I mean, is that conscious? Is that consciously the way that you've approached these different topics?
No, not kind. It's just me thinking out loud, pretty much. Like I'm working on a documentary at the moment on early Christianity, which is a similar sort of thing. I've got putting the finishing touches on my latest book, which is about psychopaths running the economy, and the podcast. They're all just my attempts to explore the world around me and try and figure out what's going on. What, in terms of the history stuff, how did we get here? What led us to this point in history? What were some of the defining moments or eras or personalities that shaped the world that we live in today, whether that's going as far back as Alexander the Great, or, Ray and I do a series on the Cold War. We're doing a series on the Renaissance as well. So I'm just interested in exploring subjects that seem to have had a big impact on civilization and trying to figure out what actually happened, get into the weeds a little bit. And I'm just open about here's what I've learned, here's what I think happened, or here's what I think is going on today. And people can feel free to agree or disagree and provide me with different interpretations or different data that they've uncovered, and we just have a conversation about it. I'm never saying that my opinion is the only opinion or the right opinion. It's just my opinion based on what I've uncovered in my research, and I like having a dialogue about these things. I like talking about interesting stuff with intelligent people, which is difficult sometimes in your day-to-day life. I don't know about you, but I mostly find that I'm surrounded by idiots, Joel. And so talking into a microphone, I'm talking to Ray, who's also a bit of an idiot, but other people get to listen. Maybe some of them can join in along the way.
Let's talk about our favorite idiot there. You mentioned you've had a lot of co-hosts over the years. You've worked with the different people. You've worked solo as well at different times. How did that relationship with Ray start? How do you two guys hook up first?
Well, I was up in the attic, and there was this old trunk that I opened up, dusty, had to blow the dust off it. And in it, I found this old, tired sock puppet that the kids of days of yore had obviously loved. And I stuck my hand up its butt, and it started talking to me. Yeah, all in my imagination, of course. And that was Ray. No, Ray. So there was some Facebook history group, I don't know, going back a few years ago that I was half paying attention to. I don't think I was really podcasting much at the time. I had built the podcast network up from 2004 to 2008. The global financial crisis hit, and we were pulling in good money from advertising before that. But then all of a sudden, overnight, literally overnight, all of the advertisers disappeared. They were mostly coming out of the US, and they disappeared within 30 days. So I took a break from podcasting for 4 or 5 years, still kept my toe in the water, but didn't do a lot from 2008 to, I think, 2013. And then I was on this history Facebook group, and somebody asked the question just broadly to the group, who's a subject, historical subject that you would like to do a podcast on that you've never done one on before? And I said Julius Caesar. And this guy called Ray Harris said, yeah, me too. I'd like to do a thing on Caesar. I didn't know Ray from a bar of soap. And funnily enough, I still get him and a bar of soap confused on a regular basis. About the same IQ as Ray and a bar of soap. Bar of soap probably smells better, quite frankly. But anyway, smells less like dirty laundry. But anyway, so I said, well, let's jump on Skype and have a chat about it, which we did, and we just got along like a house on fire. It was one of those instant falling in love moments where we just laughed and had a great time for a couple of hours on Skype. So I said, fuck it, let's do a show. So we started the Julius Caesar show, and it was only after we did a few episodes that I realized, in fact, how useless and dull Ray is as a human being, and that he was going to bring no value whatsoever. But love is love. Joel, what can I tell you? You don't choose who you love, and you don't love them based on their intelligence or their height. And you can't explain it. So I've been with him ever since, and we do lots of projects together.
It's so crazy. It's a very lucrative partnership, obviously, and it's brought you both, seemingly from the outside looking in, it's brought you both a lot of joy in life. What's crazy, Cam, is that I've got one of my clients is an Australian. He lives in Canada now, but he and I did not know each other at all before our first interaction, and it was literally, just as you said, a Facebook post. He just sort of picked me out of a lineup, so to speak. We began working together. I was working on his podcast, and from that, a friendship formed just through the occasional Skype call or our chit chat back and forth, and message boards and things like that. And he and I have that same relationship, which just, I don't know, kindred spirits or whatever. You seem to fit right with each other. I mean, you and Ray have very much, you feel like brothers. You feel like people who've known each other all your lives. To know that comes literally almost at random, just through the united interest in Julius Caesar in particular, and happening to be in that Facebook group at the moment. I mean, thank God for the internet, right? I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how you met your wife, but I met my wife at an island in the Mediterranean. We sort of met randomly at a conference one day, and we were in love 2 days later, and we're still together 10 years later. And that's just how love works, right? You just bump into people that you have a connection with, and for whatever reason it works. Yeah, look, Ray and I, we make each other laugh, I think, is the thing. We're both interested in history, and we make each other laugh a lot. We enjoy very much spending hours together just talking about history. That's a good partnership where you both enjoy doing the thing that you are doing. It has brought us untold fame and fortune along the way, Joel.
My wife would say that you both have one very important thing in common. You're both big fans of Cameron Reilly.
Well, see, this is, to get serious for a minute, this is This is a common misconception. I actually, if you've listened to my Three Illusions podcast, don't believe Cameron Reilly exists. I believe Cameron Reilly is an illusion, a construct. In fact, if there's any secret to what I do, it's the fact that I don't believe Cameron Reilly exists.
Excellent. There, do your homework, folks. The Three Illusions. It's not a very that one's not a very long podcast, right? It's a fairly short treatise. There, you can go binge upon. Cam, it's an interesting industry that we're in, and I feel like we are always, 6 months away from what's supposed to be our golden years, right? And I think if you go back and read the blogs, that was true in 2004 when you first started out. It was true in 2008 when you faded out. It was true in 2013 when you came back. It was, it's true yesterday. Everybody's always saying, oh, podcasting is just about to hit it big. What I have seen, though, is like steady, continued growth. Do you see anything in the podcast industry right now that gives you any pause or concern as somebody who's largely built their business and livelihood on it?
Well, we've seen a number of things happen over the last 14 years. On the positive side, it's a lot easier today for people to listen to podcasts than it was 14 years ago. In 2004, 2005, if you wanted to listen to a podcast, assuming that you heard about it somewhere, you could Google it and go to the website. You could stream it on the website. If you wanted to download it to your iPod, because there were no iPhones back then or smartphones really of any sort, as we'd recognize them today, you had to download iTunes. You had to search for the podcast in the iTunes directory. You had to subscribe to it. You had to download it to your computer. Then you needed to jack your iPod into your computer, manually transfer the MP3 from the iPod to your thing. You could synchronize it or manually transfer it over in order for you to be able to then go for a run or jump in your car and listen to it, plug in some headphones or whatever you want to do to listen to it. It was a laborious, difficult process for most people. Now, here we are 14 years later. I can say to someone, I'm at a cafe and I go, just, listen to my podcast. They can pull up any number of podcasting apps on their phone. As they leave the cafe, they can just hit stream and it'll start blasting through their AirPods. So we've come a long way in terms of the usability of podcasting, but it's still, I think, not there yet. Discoverability is a big problem, I think, in podcasting. The other, how do you find stuff to listen to? Are you just relying on iTunes or whatever app you're in to make recommendations? But of course, the other thing that's happened in the last 5 years in particular is the podcast directories have been swamped by mainstream content. Very large publishers, television, radio, print, and celebrities have taken over podcasting. And even though there are lots of new people discovering podcasting, I think most of them end up listening to content produced by large publishers rather than by individuals like you and me, the small-scale indie publishers. So that's a big problem, I think, moving forwards for podcasting is how do we get a duplicity of voices into a situation where they can build a sustainable business around podcasting if they're going to do it full time, because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to produce content on a weekly basis for a show, and to do that you need to be earning some money. You're putting time and effort into it, and the economic models really aren't there for that yet. I mean, I'm still shocked and surprised that iTunes don't allow podcast publishers to charge micropayments for podcast subscriptions. When I and Ray started doing our shows again 5 years ago, I decided this time around I wasn't going to rely on advertising as the economic model. I was going to experiment with user pay subscription, listener pay subscriptions. And there was no technology available to do that. Patreon wasn't around at the time. I had to custom code and build our own premium subscription model, hacking it together with bits and pieces of technology that I found lying around. I had to MacGyver my own solution with sticky tape and chewing gum. These days, you can do that a little bit easier with Patreon, but it's still not where it needs to be. The interesting thing about this, and I'm a big advocate of listener pays, is if you can, it gets back to Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans model. If you can get 1,000 people willing to pay you $5 or $10 a month to listen to the content that you produce, you can actually create a reasonable income out of that, which is, what Ray and I have managed to do over the last few years, which is why Ray was able to quit his full-time job as the person who holds a sheep's testicles when they're putting a rubber band around them. I mean, there's not a lot of glory in that job, but, he was good at it. Cupping testicles in his hands is something that, you can learn that kind of a thing. It's true. You can go to university and learn how to be a testicle cupper, but it's a bit of a dark art, and it's really an innate talent that he had. That said, we've been able to generate enough of an income that he was able to walk away from that. Does he miss it? Yes. Does he go around just randomly cupping people's testicles as a way to get that feeling back? Yes.
Some are born to testicle cupping, Cam, and some have testicle cupping thrust upon them. So you never know which one you are until you're in the thick of it. Here's the thing that I look at, and I hear a lot, especially to me among. I jokingly call it the podcast intelligentsia.
Yeah.
The people like you that have been in it since the very beginning, people like me who make their full living in and around the industry. When we're together talking and I'm listening, what I'm hearing more and more is this giant concern that any of the dynamic advertising models where, it's a Burger King commercial before your favorite podcast starts or a Geico commercial at the 30-minute mark or whatever, that those models are wrong. They're going to ruin podcasting. They'll destroy it. But I had this argument today with somebody, Cam. I'm watching YouTube videos all the time. My children are watching more than I am. And Burger King and Geico and the latest movie is exactly the advertising that's running on those videos. I mean, I don't see necessarily the evil of brand advertising coming into the space as the end of all that we've built. I think for most podcasters, the real way to make this an actual living is just as you described it. The listener model, you get 1,000 true fans, $5, $10 a month. That is a healthy living for anyone as long as you control your expenses and pay down your debt early on. But for the average Joe who wants to pursue their passion in their spare time and will never build an audience big enough to support a real full-time living, I look at what YouTube has done and I say, if we could bring that idea into podcasting in a fully fleshed out way, I think it would be great. I think we would have a birth of new ideas and new creativity, not the death of everything that we've already built. Well, do you disagree, or what are you thinking?
Well, look, I don't think it's the death, but I think it's a wasted opportunity. I've always believed that in terms of, I run a marketing company by day, right? So I have no inherent distaste for the concept of advertising. I think advertising is necessary. If you have a good product or a good service, you need to let potential customers of that product or service know that it exists, or they're never going to buy it. That said, I think there's a good way of doing advertising and a bad way of doing advertising. And just stuffing dumb, non-connected messaging down pipelines in a shotgun approach is not a very effective form of advertising, generally speaking, in terms of ROI. And it's annoying for the customers. What I've always advocated for with podcasting is to try and intelligently match advertisers to the show and to the audience of that show. So, for example, going back, how many years ago, 2007-ish, I had a show on the podcast network that was around digital photography, and it was supported by a whole range of digital photography advertisers. That was probably our most profitable show. Companies that made lenses and cameras and editing software, right? Very, very well targeted advertisers who were getting very good returns on their advertising investment by advertising on that show. That's the sort of advertising I would love to see on podcasts. There's a couple of challenges with that, though. One being not every podcast has as natural a fit. Like, who the fuck advertises on a show about Tiberius Caesar? Secondly, it's a challenge to sell that kind of advertising. It was then, and I think it still is now. And I've worked in ad agencies over the years, and I know some of the challenges here, because the sorts of companies that are going to do that kind of advertising usually aren't huge, which means they don't have dedicated ad agencies representing them. They don't have media buyers. They don't have marketing managers on staff, which means somebody needs to go out and find them, which is a lot of work and a lot of effort connecting all of the pieces up. The infrastructure to sell that kind of advertising on small podcasts, even though there might be a lot of small podcasts, doesn't really exist still today. There's a number of different players that have been trying to build that, but to the best of my knowledge, none of them are hugely successful. So we end up with mattresses.com and stamps.com and squarespace.com. In 9 out of 10 podcasts that I listen to, I hear the same ads over and over again, audible.com, the same stuff, just filling in the gaps. And I don't think that's the end of the world, but I don't think it's the smartest play either. But the other argument with that is that there's not a lot of money in advertising. In order to make any big money out of advertising on podcasts, you need to have a shit ton of listeners that's beyond the reach of most podcasters. If you're a minor big grade celebrity like a Mark Maron, let's say, and you get access to big A grade celebrities and you can build a brand and a show off of that and end up with millions of listeners, yeah, you can make a buck out of advertising. But if you're Joan Smith, who's got a podcast on teaching African tree frogs how to tap dance, you may have a small core loyal audience. You're not going to ever get enough listeners to make any money out of advertising unless there's somebody out there who breeds African tap dancing tree frogs and they sell them for $1 million a pop. Maybe, you can make the economics work. But generally speaking, it's not going to work. You've got a far better opportunity of charging $5 a month to your 1,000 African tap dancing tree frog devotees to be able to justify the time and effort you put into the show. Advertising is not a business model that is going to support a podcasting renaissance.
I was excited to see Patreon recently bought Memberful, and I don't know a whole lot about the company other than I know that there are good creators in the space that had previously used that service to build their own membership programs and sites, like what you talked about, sort of, home rolling your own back in the day. Jason Snell is one, for instance. He has sixcolors.net, writes about Apple gear and technology in general. And I believe he runs the incomparable.net, or the incomparable.com, his pop culture podcast and network. I think he runs that on the Memberful site as well. Do you think that is potentially the future? I mean, you said Patreon's sort of like halfway doing it, but they haven't adopted it fully. What is the next level of evolution of that sort of listener-supported model that podcasters need?
Yeah, look, I hadn't heard of the Memberful acquisition, but I'm just reading a thing on it now that makes a lot of sense. It says Patreon has 2 million patrons paying an average of $12 each to a total of 100,000 creators. Which is great. I think that is the business model. That combined with crowdfunding, like the Kickstarter model. I know a lot of podcasters have made that work for them. Building the infrastructure for patronage, making that easier for most people, I think is absolutely the way forwards. Personally, I'm concerned with handing that power over to a company like a Patreon. Because if, let's say I spend 2 years building up 10,000 people paying me $12 a month and I've got a nice little business running there, and then for whatever reason Patreon closes its doors, gets bought out, goes out of business, pivots their business model, then what? I'm up shit creek without a paddle again. So I'm a big believer in owning the infrastructure as much as possible that I run my business on. Leasing out my billing model to somebody like this, where I have limited control over the future, concerns me. It would be different if there were 10 different Patreon type businesses and I could port my billing infrastructure from one to the other, like I can with a website or with a hosting provider. If I'm not happy with how Linode providing me with virtual server space to run my websites, I can quite easily, bit of effort, but quite easily port it over to somebody else, another hosting provider. I can do that with where my media files are hosted, whether it's Blueberry or whether it's Libsyn or another place. I can quite easily port my media files from one to the other. There's a bit of competition, but I'm not sure that exists in the patronage space yet. Yeah. It's a little bit concerning. But yeah, look, it's a step in the right direction.
Recurring credit card charges is a hard one, I would imagine, to be able to make it go portable like that. The most interesting model that I've seen recently, Cam, and I'm hopeful that this might get adopted in a broader way. Marco Arment, the developer for the Overcast app, has said that, I don't think it's supported yet, but I think it's coming in the next update. He's going to have a thing where very simple code application you can put in your show notes and in your RSS feed as a whole. And it's literally one line of code. It's an HTML link effectively, but his app will see that, recognize it, and resolve it as a little dollar symbol. So when you're in your show, if I'm listening to Cam's show or if I'm listening to an episode, there will be a little dollar symbol on the app that I can easily click. And that dollar symbol will then take me to whatever means you have set up for listener support. So if that's a direct PayPal link, it'll take you to a PayPal link and you can make a payment there. If it's a Patreon or a member site or whatever it is, one click from the app that you're listening to the thing in. If we could get support for such a thing in Apple, which will never happen as far as third payment processing. But if we could at least get that adopted across all of the third-party apps, that would be a step in the right direction. You mentioned it in the very beginning, and I keep thinking, it seems like every year there have been hints in different ways that like this might be the year that Apple opens it up, and yet they continue to drag their feet. The fact that they have never decided to start taking some money from us podcasters by allowing us to charge our audience through their app blows my mind. What are they waiting on?
Yeah, look, I've at various times I've had good relationships with people in the upper echelons of Apple's podcasting divisions, and I've asked them the question. I've never really got any answers. I suspect it's possibly just the legal complexities of that. They're opening themselves up to, I don't know, potential Alex Jones level court cases if they're wrapping a commercial model around content like that. I suspect that's possibly one of the issues. I don't think there's anything in terms of the billing model or the hosting model that would be a concern for them. They obviously do it on a massive scale with music and TV and film. I suspect it's probably more the legal minefield that they'd be walking into.
Well, if that's the case, and I don't think you're out of line at all by saying that, if that's the case, then I don't see any real future that's resolved. The fact of the matter is, if we keep podcasting open so that any Tom, Jane, Dick, or Harry can start one, then it will always be a potential minefield. If there are no gatekeepers, then there's no one to guarantee Apple that they're not going to get sued.
Yeah. Sure. So it's not going to be maybe somebody the size of Apple that does it. We need to build an infrastructure separate to that. And I mean, that's why we have 4,000 podcast networks out there today that are all trying to figure out how to do this. How do we build an economic model around the production of content? And the Patreons, there'll be a lot of different solutions, I guess, that will hopefully evolve over time. But, as a believer in independent media, and I am, and I think that a lot of the problems that we're facing around the world today, your country and my country in particular, are the result of this consolidation of mainstream media that we've witnessed in the last 30 years. Where you have a relatively small number of old, rich white guys that control the vast majority of what people read, watch, and listen to. The solution to a lot of our socio-economic and political problems is diversification of the media, giving people ways to connect with new ideas and different ideas that challenge their thinking, make them more aware of certain issues. So we need to be doing everything that we can to build that infrastructure out. I think it's incumbent upon all of us that are in this space to try and figure out how do we build economically sustainable models that enable a wide diversity of voices. And yeah, sometimes that's going to lead to Alex Jones, but that's a risk we have to take.
I agree strongly. One of the interesting ways that you've been building out your own business model, Cam, and we're going to wrap up with this, is adding to it, continuing. You mentioned independent media. That's a great way to describe what you're doing, because it's not just podcasts. It's not just writing. You mentioned earlier the film, and you've got a book. So let's talk about those projects. Tell everybody how they can keep an eye on what you're doing next and when we might be able to take a look at it.
Oh, well, yeah. So 18 months or so ago, our audience was generous enough to support a Kickstarter that I ran to raise funding to make a documentary on early Christianity. I'm an atheist, but I'm fascinated as a historian with early Christianity. How did this small Jewish personality cult from the backwaters of the Roman Empire end up taking over the Roman Empire and having the power to make and break emperors and sort of being in control of so much of Western civilization for the next 1,500 years. So we raised funds for that, and we flew around the world and interviewed a whole bunch of New Testament and biblical scholars to try and piece together that story. Again, from a secular perspective, it's not a faith-based film, it's a history-based film, but we have a lot of Christian biblical scholars on it. So you can follow that on deepdivedocumentaries.com. The book I've been working on with a friend of mine for the last 5 or 6 years, I think the title of it's probably going to be The Psychopath Economy, but we're exploring how psychopaths end up running our political, organizational, corporate, and religious sector, and some of the challenges that's presenting to us as a society and what we can do about it, how the 1% overlap with the psychopaths in society. So, yeah, that should be coming out soon as well. There's some other film projects that are secret that Ray and I are working on. You can just, follow me on CameronReilly.com, I guess, is probably the best place where I'll be updating people on those sorts of things moving forwards.
Awesome. And all of those links will be in the show notes too, that you can check out and follow Cameron. And of course, you can go back and listen to our review, Once Upon a Time, of the Life of Caesar podcast in this feed as well. We talked about that. That was many, many moons ago. Cam.
Joel.
I cannot tell you enough. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this morning, man.
Thanks for the invite, man. It's always fun to talk about podcasting.
All right. That is another episode of Always Listening. Until next time, check out all our reviews at alwayslisteningpod.com. And I've been Joel, and that's been Cam, and we are always listening.
Yeah, I know I ain't seen it all, but I've seen enough. Yeah, I know I ain't seen it all, but I've seen enough.
Always Listening is a proud member of the Two Guys and a Rogue network. You can find all our reviews by searching Always Listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, or Google Play Music app. Also, you can find us anytime at alwayslisteningpod.com or email us at alwayslisteningpod@gmail.com. Our theme song is Enough by Bethany Raber.
When that day comes and I stop breathing, will you bury me with my love? Will you bury me with my love? 'Cause if I never thought twice about dying, then this ain't no life at all. Honey, it ain't no life at all.
Two guys and a rogue.
I'm one guy,
I'm the other.
and this is the network.